Good morning. We're going to get started today. Today is Tuesday, July 24th, 2018, and this is a special meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners. Madam Secretary, if you could please call the roll.
Good morning. Let the record reflect Commissioners Figueroa Villa, Murphy Goldsmith, and McLean Hill are present, and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we get started today, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge the incident of this past weekend and to express this Commission's profound gratitude for the members of this department and the first responders across the city who responded and brought that incident to a close with a limited loss of life. I also want to express our deepest condolences to the family of the deceased. There was a press conference, as many of you know, this morning where the chief gave both details of the incident, at least to the extent that we know them as of today. Also, video has been released related to that incident, so I will confine my comments or limit my comments to those that I've just given. Chief Moore, did you have anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Commissioner. I would just echo again the profound and tragic circumstance of this shooting. I'm grateful for the officer's ability to survive this encounter. I'm grateful for the officer's ability to protect themselves, but also make every effort to protect the community. And while I cannot pass judgment because I don't have all the information relative to their actions, the information I do have and the information in today's press conference was meant to frame and give the public a quick view of what we know today with some video footage to help convey to the public just the lose-lose situation these two officers found themselves in, and also the violence that was exacted by this suspect. And I just as a chief and on behalf of every man and woman of this department, and just as a father, at the profound sadness that we have for the loss of Ms. Corrado, and not just to her father and her brother and to her family, but to her workmates at Trader Joe's, to her friends, and really to Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Moving along, this is a special meeting of the Board of Police Commissioners, and as you can also see, we're without two of our commissioners, both our chair and vice chair, so I'm pleased to have the opportunity to stand or sit in their seat for this this morning. Mr. Teepank, if you would please outline the proceedings, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'll be happy to do so. First, I'll have the Secretary call the item, and then we'll go from there. So, Maria, would you do that, please?
Okay, this is a regular agenda item, verbal presentations and discussion by the Office of the Inspector General, American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California, Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and the Department relative to the strategies and technologies utilized by the Los Angeles Police Department and data-driven evidence-based policing.
Thank you. Invited today to present to the Commission have been two public entities, the ACLU of Southern California and the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. The meeting will start with the Office of the Inspector General, and then we'll transition to the American Civil Liberties Union, and after that to Stop LAPD Spying, and then to the department. To facilitate the meeting in an organized way, what I would suggest to the Commission that you consider is that you hold your questions for the presenters until all the presentations are done, and then if you have questions, you could call those presenters back in a group and ask them individually what the questions were you have. Then we will transition to public comment. Each of the members of the public can fill out a speaker card. Speaker cards are in the back, on the back table. Give those to one of the officers and they'll present them to us. They'll be called in order. Speakers will have 2 minutes. If you wish to have a question answered, what we will do is if you could ask the question, I will keep track of those questions, and then When we are done with all the public comment, we will come back to the questions so that we can do that in an orderly manner and facilitate the day. So that would be the outline, the flow that I would recommend. Each of the presenters have been encouraged to stay within 20 minutes so that we can conclude at a reasonable hour. We must be out of the room by 12:30, so we have just about 3 hours and 15 minutes to facilitate the meeting. So with that, I'll turn it over to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Teefank. And to open our meeting, we will start with a presentation from the Office of Inspector General.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chief Mr. Teefank, Mark Smith, Inspector General. I want to thank you first for the opportunity to be a part of the discussion today on data-driven policing strategies. Office of the Inspector General has been asked to sort of set the stage for today's forthcoming presentation through research into relevant and recent news articles, emerging technologies in policing, different reports from interested agencies, pending and active litigation from a variety of municipalities around the country. We tried to get a hold of the issues that will be presented and discussed today. One of the tasks that we undertook was to propose what we think are some of the most salient questions that are raised when considering the costs and benefits of data-driven policing. To get into some of those details, I'm going to turn it over to Police Special Investigator Camelia Naguib from our office, who, along with Julie Buchwald and our intern Dylan Gleedahl, put together a lot of this research and will hopefully present some of the questions that will be answered and discussed further today. So Camelia, please go ahead.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, and good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to present and to start off today's meeting. As the Inspector General mentioned, we've been asked to produce a sort of table-setting presentation that talks about some of the various issues that jurisdictions have faced in looking at data-driven policing. So we're going to go through a couple of different areas. I think those were already presented by the Inspector General. And in doing so, I want to emphasize that this is not an area that we have done an in-depth investigation of. These really represent our research into the types of concerns that people have, the benefits and the potential goals of these programs, and to list some questions that the Commission might want to consider as they evaluate these programs. You're going to get a lot more detail from the other presenters on how these programs work. And so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. And I also want to apologize. I can't really see the PowerPoint, so if it gets out of sync, I apologize. So the first thing we wanted to discuss was what types of programs and technologies might data-driven policing incorporate. One of the things that it generally incorporates would be platforms for data aggregation and analysis. So programs that bring data in from different places and allow for agencies to analyze and link those data. You will be hearing, I believe, more about the Palantir software that the department uses, which is a program that does that. It also includes the use of data to identify people or places that may be of interest for the department and to help develop strategies of intervention and scrutiny to help prevent and address crime. And again, you'll be hearing, I think, a bit more about two of the programs that the LAPD uses, which are PredPol and Operation Laser, that would fall into that category. And then finally, it includes the use of technology to gather data. And I'm going to just give you a quick list of what this generally includes. These are not necessarily programs that the LAPD has. These are what falls under this umbrella. So this would include, for example, automatic license plate readers, automated social media monitoring, body-worn, aerial, and other types of video systems, location and cell phone tracking, and facial recognition technology. And again, this may not be something that the LAPD has, but these are the types of programs that we're talking about. So before I move on to some of the concerns and questions that are brought up, I just want to talk a little bit about what some of the goals and benefits of using data are. And of course, you're going to hear much more about this from the department, but I just want to sort of tee that up. One of the goals of using data is to be able to deploy officers to the right areas at the right times to effectively prevent and address crime, and to be able to allocate limited resources to the places that really need them. It's also to be able to use data to identify people and places who drive the majority of criminal activity, and to be able to conduct interventions with those people and places to hopefully reduce and address crime. Data also allows the department to set goals and measures to track performance and to identify areas of need. One way that the department does this particularly is with the use of the CompStat inspection program, which includes a lot of data and a very rigorous way of looking at goals and measures. It also provides powerful tools to solve crime, identify and locate suspects. And there's also ways that the department can use this for officer accountability. You'll be hearing in the future much more about stop data, which has recently been expanded pursuant to a state law, and also the use of video to review officers' performance and to look at practices. And then finally, data can be used to measure community satisfaction and perspectives on police performance. I know the Commission has been very involved in the community survey that was recently presented. We also are aware of a new program that the department has been involved in using cell phones and apps to conduct short surveys about the police department. So hopefully we'll be hearing more about that as well. So the next thing I want to do is just talk generally about some of the concerns and questions that have come up across the country about the acquisition, the implementation, and the use of this type of technology. And they fall into three big categories. And this might be a useful framework for commissioners to consider as they look at these questions. So one of the big issues is that there's a concern that there is widespread adoption by law enforcement of these types of technologies without what's called sufficient front-end accountability. So really public input and public transparency. And so there's a few different questions that you may want to consider as you look at this. One, to what extent should agencies be disclosing the acquisition or implementation of these types of programs? Are there types of programs that shouldn't be disclosed or should be withheld from the public, and what would those be? How much community input and what type should agencies solicit prior to the purchase and use of these types of programs? I know the Commission has worked hard recently to solicit community input on, for example, the release of body-worn video, the use of drones or UAVs, et cetera. What are the goals and parameters of the programs? Are they clearly articulated, what they're going to be used for and what they cannot be used for? What process is used to ensure that policies are in place prior to their use? One concern that's been given around the country is that agencies sometimes start using a program prior to the implementation of policies. And then what analysis is necessary to ensure that the program does not negatively impact civil liberties or civil rights? And some of the areas that are of particular concern with these types of technologies are privacy concerns, First Amendment issues, and disparate impact on various communities. And then the final thing that has come up for us is how does the language used to describe the program affect how the program is perceived? So when we talk about predictive policing or strategic extraction, how does that affect how the public understands these programs and how officers understand these programs? The next big area is pretty straightforward. It's really, costs. Which can, of course, include not just the acquisition of a certain type of technology, but also post-purchase costs, maintenance costs, upgrade costs, and are those being sufficiently analyzed and presented to the public sort of on a cost-benefit analysis? Another big question is whether private funds or public grants should be used to purchase these types of technologies, and whether that impacts accountability and transparency. And then the final area generally to be looking at these programs is the question of oversight and accountability. How is data being stored? Who is it being shared with? And how long is it being retained? Is data being retained indefinitely, or is there a process to purge that on a regular basis? What mechanisms ensure that access to data is controlled so that unauthorized people don't have access and that people don't use it for unauthorized purposes? Are programs regularly audited and evaluated? Are there statistics that are being given to the public so they understand how the program is working? And what are the measures of success that we should be aware of? And then finally, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a later slide, what are the potential unintended consequences of the development of a certain kind of program? And how are those assessed by a department, and how can they be mitigated? One of the things we've been asked to do is to look at what other jurisdictions have done in looking at these general questions about acquisition and use. And specifically to look at the Oakland ordinance called the Surveillance and Community Ordinance, which is a comprehensive policy on the acquisition and use of surveillance equipment. And for the Commission's interest, I'd just like to point out that this ordinance specifically encompasses software designed to forecast criminal activity and criminality. So that would include some of the data-driven strategies that you'll be hearing about today. The ordinance requires assessment of possible disparate impact on any particular group. It requires City Council approval of any usage policies for each technology to be implemented. It requires regular reports on the use of the technology, any data gathered, where it's being shared, and compliance with policies and procedures. And it prohibits agencies from entering into non-disclosure agreements with vendors or others. We also looked around to see what other agencies have implemented similar policies, and we were able to find some jurisdictions that have done that, and these are up on the screen. What I would note, though, is that although they are similar to the Oakland ordinance in some ways, they do not necessarily incorporate data-driven strategies, but they more generally focus on technologies to gather data, your surveillance technology, use of cameras, et cetera. So that's sort of what we found there. So just to close it up, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the specific questions and concerns that have come to us about two of the programs that you'll be hearing about today, PredPol and Operation Laser, and some of the questions you may want to be thinking about as you hear about these programs. First, there's a question about whether these technologies end up having a disproportionate or disparate impact on people of color or on disadvantaged communities, and specifically whether there are impacts so that people who are affected because they live in a certain area or they work in a certain area, are they more likely to be stopped, searched, or impacted by the policy? There's concerns about police activity sort of creating a feedback loop where there are more police, they're going to identify more crime, and those areas are considered going to continue to be high crime areas. How can agencies ensure that the data used for analysis is reliable and unbiased? We've heard a bit of concern that the underlying data may be inaccurate or there may be duplications in data, and what process is the department using to make sure that that data is accurate and has integrity? Questions about the data algorithms that the department uses. Are these correctly identifying the right people, places, and times, and how do we know that that's the case? And to what extent does officer discretion impact the program? Are there any ways that an officer can sort of guide the data at all? And then finally, do these programs incentivize or encourage unwarranted targeting or profiling of people and places by officers? The final thing I just want to close on, and this was something that we were requested to discuss, is the chronic offender bulletins. Again, you will be hearing much more about that from the department and other groups, but we wanted to just discuss some of the concerns that have come to us about this program. I got cut off. Hello? So what are chronic offender bulletins? They are a component of Operation Laser, and basically what they do is they use data to rank people who are considered to be impact players or chronic offenders in a particular area, and identify those people for further scrutiny or attention by police officers. And some of the questions that we've heard about these programs are, how can community members know who is on a chronic offender bulletin? And is there any way to appeal your selection to be on a chronic offender bulletin? Does the process further criminalize community members based solely on their criminal history? Some of the factors that the program takes into account rely very heavily on previous arrests, parole or probation status, et cetera. And does that essentially mean that someone is going to be targeted because of their past deeds? Does the inclusion of arrests and police contacts mean that officers can guide who is going to be selected for these programs? And then finally, there's a question about the goal of sort of extracting, this is a written goal, extracting people who are considered to be impact players from the community. Is that goal at odds with other community goals such as re-entry? And so that's really the types of things that we've heard. We wanted to just set the stage for you as you hear about these programs, and that's really all I have today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Melanie Ochoa from the ACLU present? Ms. Ochoa? I don't see her. She confirmed. So, Mr. Khan, I know it might take you a few moments to set up, so could you come forward, please? it might take Mr. Khan a couple of minutes to set his computer up, so just give us a moment. Mr. Khan, in the brochures you handed us, the PowerPoint, is this a document?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioners, in your blue folder, Mr. Khan provided you a copy of the PowerPoint. It's also on the screen before you.
In the folder you have the PowerPoint. You also have a letter to the Inspector General from May 8th, and you also have an organizational sign-on to the Commission as well, and a copy of our report.
And thank you. In advance of your getting started in your presentation, I do want to acknowledge the fact that for the nearly 2 years that I've been sitting on this commission, you have on a very regular basis brought concerns about this area of policing to our attention, and so I'm pleased to give you the opportunity to, in a formal setting, address this question. Thank you for being here.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Hamid Khan with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition.
I'm Jamie Garcia with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition.
So we are here today to speak about data-driven, evidence-based policing. But before we delve into our presentation, it's crucial that we unpack the title of this hearing itself. What it is essentially saying is that how data is turned into evidence. However, what we will show is how and where data is collected, which individuals and what communities are central to this data, and how presumption of guilt is turned into evidence or fact. So we ask that you keep in mind the spin that is being created by this very definition of the title. Yet in that process, we will see how race and racial profiling remains central to these programs, and in the process, how communities are pathologized, how they are demonized, and how they are criminalized, to make that jump from presumption to evidence to ultimately contain, control, and criminalize. The work of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition offers a deeply enriching and provocative understanding and analysis that exposes multiple layers of the national security police state. These tools of social control are deployed through many sectors, including social services, healthcare, housing, and employment. In essence, this enables a constant surveillance and policing of our bodies in every aspect of our lives. Communities of color, immigrants, and poor folks are the primary targets of these modes of surveillance. The Coalition's work does not take a top-down policy reform or recommendation approach, nor do we seek more transparency and oversight of policing, an institution that remains inherently violent and flawed by design. Instead, our work, rooted in the community, and our fight for abolition of policing takes us on a journey exposing the multiple tentacles of state violence, including the creation of the other, knowledge production, and the deep complicity of academia, corporate profit, and the deadly impact and trauma of programs such as predictive policing on our communities. This presentation is a call to action. Next, please. So let's just set the stage right away. What we have up front and center shows the mentality and the scholarship and the intent behind policy development and enforcement. Edwin Banfield was a social scientist and an academic at University of Chicago and Harvard University. This is a time when he wrote this book, The Unheavenly Cities. This is a time when the war on gangs, crime, and drugs was being unleashed. We all know the results, the devastating impact on Black and brown and poor communities. But Edward Banfield was also the intellectual and political mentor of James Q. Wilson, one of the co-creators of Broken Windows, along with George Kelly.
And when you read what Edward Banfield is saying, and being an advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, that the implication that lower class culture is pathological seems fully warranted. Rather than waste time and public money implementing policies based on the false notion that all men were created equal, better just to face facts and acknowledge that natural divisions exist. Members of the lower classes should leave school in 9th grade to get a jump on a lifetime of manual labor. The minimum wage should be repealed to encourage employers to create more jobs for low-value labor. The state should give intensive birth control guidance to incompetent poor, and the public should feel free to crack down on young, lower-class men. So you will see as we move through our slides that what we are saying, what it makes sense. The coalition grounds itself in certain principles. Our first principle is that what we are speaking about today is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history. Our second guiding value is that there is always an other that is created to justify these policies, an enemy that is created. Historically speaking, we talk about the multiple faces that have been paraded: the savage native, the criminal black, the illegal Latino, the manipulative Asian, the terrorist Muslim, the deviant women, and the deviant queer and trans bodies. So we have to ground ourselves in that history. Next guide. Then we also have to look at the history of policing itself, and what we see is going back to, because we cannot look at predictive policing today and data-driven without going back. We look at lantern laws back in the early 1700s, when in New York City, an enslaved body had to walk with a lantern to self-identify themselves as a threat if they were not accompanied by a master. The Warren gangs. Well, there's much been spoken about broken windows. And then, of course, CompStat. CompStat is always paraded as this magic bullet. But I just want to go quickly about CompStat's basically recognized core components: timely and accurate information or intelligence, rapid deployment of resources, effective tactics, and relentless follow-up. We've seen the impact of CompStat. We've seen the impact of broken windows in Skid Row. We've seen how communities have been devastated and impacted all along. Next slide, please. Another piece we want to lift that really drives this kind of policing is intelligence-led policing. This is a concept that was imported from England that got started by the Kent Constabulary, and it's also known as a Kent model. But what's also interesting about intelligence-led policing is that from our vantage point, it's completely presumptive, but the two key elements are behavioral surveillance and data mining. How our behavior is constantly surveilled, how it's mined, how it's uploaded, so legitimizing presumptive policing. But what's key to intelligence-led policing is the third bullet point, that it's a process that involves planning outcomes an agency wants to achieve. And I think that's really the key, that everything when we talk about data-driven policing is an outcome that the agency wants to achieve, and we've seen the impact of those outcomes as well. Another seminal event that happened was, and of course we all know about 9/11, that the 9/11 Commission report identified that the events of 9/11 happened as a result of data not being shared. The data was not being shared amongst various agencies, and that's what led to the event of 9/11. But what happened was that after the 9/11 Commission report, Congress passed a law, Intelligence Reform Terrorism Prevention Act in 2004, and it did some really key things that shifted the infrastructure of data-driven evidence-based policing. One, it created a massive information sharing environment where information would flow horizontally, vertically, through local law enforcement agencies, federal agencies, international agencies, private corporation, public sector, private sector. So a massive sort of a hub and spoke system of information gathering. Secondly, it created the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which brought under its umbrella all the major intelligence agencies in the country. And thirdly, it created a definition of suspicious activity. And this is where the key starts. This is the foundation of where we are today. And the way they define suspicious activity, which is a part of LAPD Special Order 11, Special Order 1, now Special Order 17, it's defined in the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program that, and I quote, that it's observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of terrorist and/or criminal activity. So when you break it down, it's observed behavior, reasonably indicative. I'm watching somebody that indicates to me that they are thinking of doing something wrong, right? So this is what really gives rise to presumptive policing and when we talk about data-driven, evidence-based policing. It also led to the expansion of fusion centers. These are the central hub and spoke systems of information that moves through various systems. One of the largest ones is in Norwalk in East Los Angeles County. There's about 85 of those around the country. LAPD is one of the major partners of these fusion centers, along with the Joint Terrorism Task Force. This is what we have identified as LAPD's architecture of surveillance. Now, it includes various elements to that, human-based and electronic-based technology. Suspicious activity reporting program, iWatch program, predictive policing, and various forms of information technology where information is picked up. And we'll show you some photos. This is the digital receiver technology. Next one is Stingrays. Many people have heard of those. These are cell phone catchers that suck up your information from your cell phones. Next one is Trapwire. Trapwire is it is thermal imaging. Your body image is picked and uploaded into various databases. High-definition cameras installed in helicopters. Automatic license plate readers. We know the impact of automatic license plate readers. There are open lawsuits going on. Most recently, we were able to stop the installation of a whole periphery of license plate readers in Culver City. Drones, and we've had enough conversation about drones, and now increasingly what we saw in Chicago and various other municipalities, how drones are going to be used on spying on people. Body cameras, a tool for 24 hours of surveillance and information gathering. Freedom on the move. Many of you may have never even heard of that. This is right out of the battlefield of Afghanistan. This is used quite effectively into monitoring and scoping people out. Sometimes the LA Sheriff brings it out. This is something that is used during big protests and all that, and we've documented that on May Day 2017, that how they had this freedom on the move, tracking people and following the crowd as well. And this is just a process of how information is gathered and it's collected. We can move on. This is what we wanted to highlight is the massive information sharing environment, and we call it the stalker state. That when you look at this thing, and this is posted on our website, that you have the public sector, information moves from public sector to private sector to public sector, law enforcement agencies. So in essence, think about it in the context of a sanctuary city. Then when people are speaking about a sanctuary city, the vulnerability factors are not just only limited to LAPD picking up the phone and calling ICE. The vulnerability factors are the information that LAPD uploads into the information sharing environment. The vulnerability factors come in that how Vigilant Solution that has contracts with ICE also is a provider of automatic license plate readers as well. And we recently saw what happened with the Irvine Company, where 3 of their main malls, they were exposed that everybody that was going into these shopping centers, their license plate reader was being picked up by Vigilant Solution and in essence was being sent to ICE as well.
So we're going to hear a lot about data today, so we're going to dive into data. So data in the hands of LAPD is a biased weapon and will always be racialized and used to target Black, brown, and poor communities. Historically and currently, there exists an intention and a purpose by law enforcement to document certain acts by certain groups of people as criminal, thus creating crime data. As we historically know, and as we will currently show, law enforcement uses crime data to contain, control, and criminalize communities. As a result, Black, brown, and poor people who are more often represented in crime data are criminalized and incarcerated. Politically, this is tied to gentrification and the redevelopment of communities for the very few. We see this in the current political moment of the city where housing remains an afterthought to the criminalization of homeless people. Data therefore becomes a weapon because people in their communities get quantified as the problem or the risk rather than the conditions they are living under, such as poverty, racism, and intentional neglect. Next slide. You will hear LAPD attempt to say their data is not biased. However, even scientists understand that all data collected has an inherent bias. Due to the institutionalized racism inherent in the policing system, intentional racialized targeting undoubtedly makes its way into crime data. Criminality, in fact, only gets assigned to certain people. LAPD's crime data is highly racialized, predominantly targeting the Black community. This is not a perception problem, but this is a fact. Reflected in LAPD's own data set, which is the latest data set we found with this type of specificity, compared to the white population, the Black community is 127% more likely to be frisked and 76% more likely to be searched. While compared to white population, the Black community is 24% less likely to have drugs and 37% less likely to have weapons. let's look at more of LAP data taken from their own open source website. Looking at stops. Stops have not only increased significantly in the Black community, but the Black community is 5 times more likely to be stopped than white folks, as we see in 2017. Looking at arrests, next slide, yeah. Though LAPD will remark that arrests have gone down, however, the Black community is still 5 times more likely to be arrested than white folks. And if we dig a little bit deeper, as we have seen, by the work of Cali Lytle Hernandez and the $1 Million Hoods Project, arrests of houseless folks has also increased. Using LAPD arrest data from January 1st, 2012 to June 30th, 2017, Hernandez's report documents that LAPD arrests of houseless persons continue to climb even into the first 6 months of 2017. LAPD made 7,740 houseless arrests between January 1st and June 30th, 2017, pushing houseless arrests from 17.5% of total arrests in 2016 to 19.6% of total arrests during the first half of 2017. The Black community represents the majority of houseless arrests, 37%, and the majority of the houseless population, which is 43%. You will also hear LAPD claim that none of their data points include race data. However, many data points stand as a proxy for race. Let's look at the other data that LAPD uses to operationalize data-driven policing interventions. Looking at parole and probation data, in a multi-county study which included LA County and 11 other counties, the Black community made up 7.9% of that total population. Subsequently, the Black community made up 22.9% of all new parole cases between October 2011 to October 2015. This is how non-racialized data becomes a proxy for race. Gang identification is another data point that's found within LAPD data-driven programs. An audit of the Cal Gang database in 2016 identified 150,000 alleged gang members in California. Of those identified as gang members in Los Angeles, 30% are from the Black community, which makes up only 9% of LA City's population. Lastly, let's look at field interview cards, which are highly used in data-driven policing programs of LAPD. Unfortunately, at this moment, there's not much to say in regards to LA as of yet, because Deputy Chief Regina Scott really let us down. She told me personally she would have no problem running dissent data for FI cards. However, she failed to respond to any of our emails dating back to July 6th until yesterday. Conveniently answering our email a day before this hearing, she told us that our request for dissent race data of FI cards will have to be forwarded to LAPD Discovery Section. However, the community doesn't stop. We decided to look at other data from other cities to anticipate what we might see in LA. In Miami, of 60,000 stops, officers were twice as likely to fill out an FI card on a Black individual. In New Orleans, over 70,000 field interview cards were filled out over a 1-year period, which resulted in an investigation by their Inspector General because it was feared the FI card was being used as a tool for surveillance of the city's population. Now we're going to look at how these data points that were discussed get operationalized into data-driven evidence-based policing programs. Operation Laser, LA Strategic Extraction and Restoration, is a person-based predictive policing program. From one of the first reports written by Justice Security and Strategies, the consultant paid to institute the LASER program, it claims the program to be analogous to laser-like surgery, where a surgeon uses modern technology to remove a tumor. That is how our communities are being referred to as tumors. Next slide. LASER creates a chronic offender list of people to track, trace, and surveil. 15 to 50 chronic offenders are created per division with backups similar to a quota system. Little to no ability exists to discover or contest being on the list, essentially making this a secret list. LASER also targets communities by creating LASER zones. This is a map of 77th, Southwest, Southeast, and Newton Division. Within these zones are anchor points, which are homes, apartments, and businesses that LAPD claims are responsible for crime. LAPD intervenes at these anchor points by helping with evictions, serving abatement notices, or gentrifying the area. This effectively redlines the community, displacing people and/or making them homeless. In the process of choosing LASER zones, in a report entitled Street Level Trends in Violent and Gun-Related Crimes in South LA, 2006 to 2015, Justice Security and Strategies analyzed crime trends in over 10,000 streets. Identified streets where crime occurred most, JSS compared those streets to census data. This identified black female, head of household, who had lower owner-occupied housing as mostly residing on these streets. Just in the process of identifying the community and correlating them to crime trends, presumptively criminalizes them and their homes. Let's look at Laser's risk assessment and think back to the previous data points that I mentioned. To get on the list, LAPD uses arrest data, parole probation data, FI cards, and gang identification. So who is naturally going to be on this list? This is one of the chronic offender bulletins we received that we redacted. We are currently in conversation with the city attorney's office through our lawyers regarding the release of the chronic offender list. Lastly, let's quickly reflect on PredPol, another data-driven program. To start, I'm going to read a quote from co-creator Jeff Brantingham, who compares criminals to hunter-gatherers. Criminal offenders are essentially hunter-gatherers. They forage for opportunities to commit crimes. The behaviors that a hunter-gatherer uses to choose a wildebeest versus a gazelle are the same calculations a criminal uses to choose a Honda versus a Lexus. LAPD can talk all it wants about its mathematical model that incorporates past crimes with current crimes to create hotspots to patrol in, to prevent crime, but that makes no difference. What happens in the box is all that matters. Data-driven policing is just an extension of broken windows policing, which targets low-level offenses, criminalizing people and not their conditions they are living under. This is an image taken from PredPol manual that another organization named Lucy Parsons Lab received through a Freedom of Information Act request in Chicago. PredPol explicitly states to officers to engage in broken windows policing when they enter a hotspot. There are countless reports of the impact of broken windows on communities like Skid Row, its launching ground. 12,000 citations were issued within the first year of the Safer Cities Initiative, a broken windows policing tactic, also known as RESET. We know broken windows theory is a discredited theory. Bernard Harcourt, a well-known critical theorist, states in his book, The Illusion of Order, broken windows is a theory that is conceptually flawed and results in aggressive detentions of tens of thousands of our fellow citizens. This style of policing leads to the violations of personal rights, and broken windows approach is really window dressing, and there are actually more profound processes of real estate development and wealth redistribution. Data-driven policing is nothing new. It is broken windows, it is gang databases, it's the redlining of communities, and it must be dismantled.
And in our closing, we have our demands, and our demands are that you cannot reform this, you cannot scale it back, you cannot tinker it, this has to be shut down. But what we have shown is how data is constructed, how criminality is assigned and state violence operationalized and deployed. But the deeper expose is the trajectory of how certain communities are thought of. We showed you Edward Banfield pathologizes and demonizes communities, we get broken windows. Jeff Brantingham's underlying theme considers people savages, where whole communities become hotspots, we get PredPol. Craig Uchida compares people and communities to tumors that need to be surgically removed, and we get Laser. This is the intellectual framework of your policy development and so-called public safety. To insult, to degrade, to dehumanize, resulting in displacement, banishment, incarceration, and murder. This must stop, and this must end now. But before we leave, we just want to say that you will hear from the department talk about that race is not a data point. You will hear from the department that this is about efficiency. You will hear about data is objective. You will hear computers are race neutral. You will hear crime has gone down. But what we have shown is that this is nothing more than what lantern laws were 300 years ago. This is nothing different than what broken windows has been, and this is nothing different than what gang injunction and the war on drugs has devastated our communities.
Thank you. Our next presenter, Ms. Ochoa.
Ms. Ochoa is here from the ACLU.
Thank you.
She'll come to the table. She has a verbal presentation.
Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I apologize for being late, and I apologize that I was not able to hear the prior presentation, so if I repeat anything, I apologize for that.
No, it's fine. This is Los Angeles, and traffic is what it is. Take a deep breath, and if you're ready, we're certainly happy to have you and to hear you this morning.
Thank you. So my name is Melanie Ochoa. I'm a staff attorney at the ACLU of Southern California, but also somewhat relevant to today's discussion, I also have a PhD in sociology and social policy, and the focus of my doctoral research was social organization theory, which is a theory that focuses on understanding the ways in which certain structural neighborhood conditions contribute to specific pro-social activities that we typically understand as making communities more safe and cohesive. And so I plan to interject a bit with my own research on this topic to help provide some additional context to the concerns that I raised today. So at the outset, I wanted to ask the Commission, the Chief, and the audience, which includes LAPD officers, to look at this issue with a different perspective than perhaps you've looked at it before. It is not incomprehensible to the LAPD as an institution that individuals who are the subject of monitoring, labeling, surveillance, targeted stops, etc., would feel violated, dehumanized, and hostile as a result. We know this because when LAPD officers are the object of surveillance, interventions, or discipline, these concerns are recognized, taken seriously, and acted upon. For instance, even though the LAPD purchased and outfitted vehicles with GPS tracking to monitor the location of its on-duty officers, the ultimate embodiment of the phrase, "If you aren't doing anything wrong, you shouldn't have anything to be concerned about," they were activated only after protracted negotiations and a recognition of officers' concerns about being monitored. Concerns regarding officer privacy, even when on duty, was also a consideration in rejecting an always-on policy for body cams. And when discussing discipline and intervention for officers whom LAPD has investigated and found to have violated its own policies, if not also criminal law, the Office of Inspector General in its past reports has emphasized ensuring that the department adhere to principles of procedural justice, so that officers feel respected throughout the disciplinary process and do not develop negative attitudes towards the department as a result of their treatment. So this is all just to say that we would like to see the department and commission approach its treatment of community members who are not represented by the PPL with equal care and concern for the dignity and privacy. And we would also like to see the department recognize the potential for negative and justifiable backlash by community members if those interests are not taken into account. So on the question of whether and how we should be using predictive policing to target people in communities with intensive policing resources, I want to raise 5 points that can generally be boiled down to tactics, intervention and innovation in interventions, community costs, error, and transparency. So first, regardless of the tools being used, the department should not use tactics that are destined to lead to greater uses of force and to increase community distrust. Whether we are talking about predictive policing or targeting specific areas based on CompStat reports, the department should move away from using suppression policing tactics. These tactics include aggressive policing of individuals using public spaces and targeting individuals for stops based on pretext or alleged consent stops that individuals rarely feel at liberty to refuse, regardless of whether these individuals are selected as targets by a computer program. One of Chief Moore's stated goals is to reduce the use of deadly force and bring the number of individuals killed by LAPD officers down to 0. This is a commendable goal and one that we applaud and fully support. However, it is not a goal that is compatible with suppression policing tactics, including those that are part of the department's predictive policing efforts, and particularly Operation Laser. We have seen too often that these incidents where officers initiate unnecessary stops ultimately escalate and officers kill people. The killing of Ezell Ford represents such an unnecessarily tragic incident. Mr. Ford, an unarmed person who had not committed any crime, was stopped based solely on his presence in an area the department characterized as a gang area. The officer's own statements admit that this designation made them highly suspicious of even the most innocent behavior and motivated them to stop an individual without evidence that he was involved in a crime. The department's recent report on biased policing reduction also flagged that many of the complaints about officers' conduct arose from officers unnecessarily escalating interactions with the public. This is an inevitable result of policing tactics that encourage officers to view entire neighborhoods as war zones, presence in public spaces as suspicious, and residents as merely suspects that have yet to be caught. The recent report on the public's perceptions of the LAPD again reflected that many, particularly those in the Black community, believe that officers use unnecessary force and conduct unnecessary stops and searches. This survey also reported that members of all racial and geographic communities recognize that LAPD's treatment of individuals varies based upon race. This is a reality that will not be altered if the department continues to use the same practices that are both independently dangerous and unequally applied across communities. Second, community and individual level intervention should not be focused on punitive measures and should involve agencies other than or in lieu of the police. To the extent the department's predictive policing program claims to identify at-risk individuals, we should not focus energies on finding ways to preemptively penalize people for fitting certain criteria. As a result, the interventions adopted should be supportive, not punitive. Social service interventions can help address problems for at-risk individuals and communities before crimes occur and are a more productive use of resources than punitive measures. We cannot arrest our way out of poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunities. Predictive policing efforts have occurred or are ongoing in a number of jurisdictions and have taken a variety of forms. It is always difficult to understand what actually causes increases or decreases in crime because there are so many diverse factors that affect the occurrence of crime. In addition, there are serious accuracy problems with the way crime is defined, observed, and measured in any period. But where predictive policing algorithms have been most effective is when interventions that occurred included provision of social services or other non-policing efforts. And these type of interventions are useful and valuable even without investing significant resources in predicting future occurrences of crime. For instance, in New Orleans, the NOLA for Life program identified individuals that they believed were at risk of being future victims in areas of need of social services or infrastructure in need of repair. The interventions adopted included things like repairing streetlights, cleaning streets, providing violence prevention in schools, and funding other local services like mentoring and parenting programs, job training, violence interruption, and other social services. As time went on, however, the focus became more punitive and the provision of social services waned while police continued to rely upon the data in their enforcement work. The earlier period of holistic intervention coincided with a nearly 22% decrease in homicides, while homicides increased as the focus shifted. Richmond's Operation Peacemaker Fellowship provided targeted services and even stipends to those individuals to be most at risk. This coincided with a yearly decrease in homicides averaging 55% in the first 5 years after it was adopted. This is in addition to the growth of human capital and productivity resulting from the skills, education, and jobs earned by those within the program. A truly bold leadership move for this department, and one that would speak volumes about its commitment to positive outcomes to the community, would be to reject additional city funding for more police-led interventions and insist that funds be funneled directly to organizations that are better suited to provide alternatives and are also more likely to elicit a positive response from those you seek to target. Third, we must recognize that the types of interventions LAPD currently relies upon are not without cost to the community and may even risk increasing crime through various mechanisms. These are complicated outcomes that are hard to track, but we cannot focus myopically on immediate crime rates as the only indicator of success. Instead, we must recognize the potential cost of these policing tactics and consider longer-term impacts, particularly as building community trust and partnership has been recognized as a priority for this department. For instance, in my own research on social organization, I observed that residents' willingness to engage in activities that we believe keep communities healthy, such as participation in local volunteer groups or informally policing the behavior of youth in the community, are a product of individuals' perceptions of community value. And this was true regardless of the socioeconomic status or makeup of the community. If the community was valued by its residents for whatever reason, they were more likely to be actively involved. Conversely, those who could not see the unique value in the community were more inclined to move or withdraw than participate in the community as problems arose. This was true whether the community in question was a housing project or a high-income vacation community. Labeling and treating a community and its residents as problems is apt to lead to disinvestment in the neighborhood in ways that undermine public safety in the long run, even if there are immediate short-term impacts on crime rates. In addition, we do not observe the counterfactual scenarios to those suppression tactics to truly understand how these stops may be interfering with the processes that discourage offending or recidivism, such as fostering pro-social ties, jobs, and other forms of community participation that reduce the likelihood of reoffending. Given the uncertainty of any pre-crime interventions, we should be taking an approach that is likely to result in the least potential harm, especially when there is a real risk that the predictions are inaccurate. Which brings me to my fourth point. Any predictive policing model is likely to be full of error, making it ineffective and dangerous as a policing tool. There are serious issues with the information going into the models relied upon by LAPD, and by extension, the predictions that the models create. Two of the variables that I want to focus on are crime measures and gang membership, which are currently used to identify areas and people that will be subject to more intense policing. First, there is no objective and accurate measure of crime. The information within any predictive model is never actually crime. It is the department's ability to measure crime, which diverges from reality in a host of ways. For example, arrests are not a reliable indicator because they are a product of decisions about where officers will be deployed, who they approach and on what grounds, their discretion on how to respond to a particular incident, their responsiveness to service calls, and the public's willingness or desire to solicit officers' intervention. Crime reports are also an unreliable indicator. Among other things, they are subject to both underreporting from victims and manipulation within the department. Even just within the LAPD, there have been recurrent reports of crimes being classified or underreported in ways that fit various department narratives, whether it is that crime is increasing or decreasing for certain offenses or in certain communities. Bias is also baked into any crime-related criteria. Even if race is not explicitly included into the analysis, almost any measure is going to be impacted by a dramatically different treatment that Blacks and Latinos often receive throughout the criminal justice process. For instance, predictive policing models include the reported rates of crime or presence of individuals on probation to determine the neighborhood risk score. But those numbers are product of historical practices. The same act can be legally characterized in different ways or dropped completely from a charge for a defendant viewed as sympathetic. So these measures are not reflecting an objective fact, but rather the consequences of a lifetime of inequitable criminal justice judgments. As a result, we should recognize that these predictions are not objective. Placing this data into an algorithm just provides a veneer of legitimacy and neutrality, sometimes referred to as math washing, but the products of a bias system remain biased. The department's gang member designations are also apt to be rife with error and lead to faulty conclusions. Multiple courts have already recognized that the way that law enforcement, including LAPD, identifies people as gang members for inclusion on a gang injunction is likely to be prone to error. And the California State Legislature recognized that individuals were inappropriately being added to the statewide gang database known as CalGang on the basis of incorrect criteria and even law enforcement claims that contradicted the evidence used to support them. Even with these serious concerns about the inaccuracy and lack of oversight for both gang injunctions and the CalGang database, both of these are subject to more scrutiny and more rigorous vetting than the LAPD's internal designations of gang members used to identify targets for Operation Laser. These internal designations include all of the flaws in these other two programs and more, simply by virtue of being even less well regulated with no meaningful check on who is designated a gang member. Ezell Ford, again, provides an example of how designations of gang membership are likely to be both inaccurate and lead to devastating consequences. The officers who stopped Mr. Ford believed that he was a gang member simply based on his race, age, and presence in a neighborhood around others that they had also unilaterally determined to be gang members. The officer's violent attempt to apprehend a young man who was really merely walking on the streets of his own neighborhood was colored by that designation and ended in his death. In its predictive policing efforts, the department is asking the community to trust that its predictions of future crime are so accurate that they should tolerate the suppression tactics, the stops of individuals without evidence of criminal activity, and the labeling and targeting of fellow community members. But there is simply not a basis for that trust. This inaccuracy is also why we should focus on non-punitive interventions. There was no harm caused in providing unnecessary social services to a young man who was already trying to be responsible and productive but was wrongly labeled a gang member, or even someone who was formerly active in a gang but is now seeking a different lifestyle. Conversely, repeated stops that interfere with his ability to retain a job, arrests for minor infractions that would go unnoticed elsewhere, or an unnecessary stop that escalates into a police shooting have irreversible negative consequences. And those consequences extend beyond the individual to those who see his example and rightly believe that no matter what you do, the police will treat you as a criminal. These are actions that impede an individual from desisting from crime, and agents of public safety should be actively encouraging, not disrupting, pro-social behavior. Fifth, and finally, any attempt at predictive policing systems must be preceded by a meaningful and well-informed public debate, and adopted programs must be subject to continued monitoring. Separate from the concerns about tactics and the accuracy of data is the concern about transparency. These are potentially dangerous programs that rely on serious intrusions of individuals' privacy. The public has a right to know if a policing agency is even considering adopting these programs, and it should be subject to public debate, approval, and monitoring. The racial impact of these programs also needs to be included in any ongoing program monitoring. Moreover, transparency must extend to the programs themselves. Too many vendors refuse to divulge the algorithms used to designate places and people as threats. That alone should be disqualifying. Without this understanding, the department cannot ensure the public that these designations are not based on inappropriate, if not illegal, considerations. Any vendor must be subject to in-depth, independent, and ongoing scrutiny of their techniques, goals, and performance. This should include conducting independent, algorithmic audits to help identify forms of bias. Vendors' claims of trade secrecy or business confidentiality must not be allowed to override the public's interest in transparency. But transparency is only meaningful when public officials are willing to listen and respond to the public's concerns. Too often, entities are willing to sanction the use of these technologies because they think they will be exempt from its use. But, for instance, when Fresno was considering the use of technology that created threat scores for individuals and addresses for police when responding to calls, that technology was rejected when it returned a yellow warning for a city council member based on faulty information. And when the Pasadena police was being trained on the use of Spokeo for social media monitoring, officers requested specific training on how to be excluded from the database. So again, I ask that the department and the commission look at these predictive policing tools as though they themselves would be subject, and consider whether they would sanction the information and the consequences that flow from them if they presume they would be on the receiving end. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that the department and commission should look at the issue of predictive policing tactics applied to the community in the same way they would evaluate those tactics if applied to officers or themselves. It must recognize the serious risk of harm that predictive policing systems, particularly combined with suppression tactics, could cause on communities, and that this impact is borne more significantly by Blacks and Latino communities who are already subject to different policing based on their race. To the extent that technology is used to identify individuals and communities that are at risk, the first response should be to provide service-based interventions rather than punitive measures. Taking this approach will seriously show that the LAPD is intent on being a partner with the community and wants to increase public safety through the most effective means possible, not merely tout statistics on the number of arrests. And I want to acknowledge that I recognize that this is a complicated request. Accurate or not, the police department is the entity that is most often looked at as solely responsible for the public safety of the community. When we consider the impact of the public library, we don't look at crime rates to evaluate its success, even though it is quite possible that the services it provides may be integral in helping individuals desist from or avoid participation in criminal activities. I also understand that the department and commission is limited in the fact that it can only control what the LAPD does. This is not city council. And even if you agreed with everything I said today, this body does not have the power to reallocate funding to different city agencies or outside organizations. However, the department can commit from using suppression tactics. It can also be a persuasive advocate for the allocation of funding to types of programs and supportive services that have the power to be effective tools to uplift the community and protect it, rather than being a willing recipient or arbiter of funds for non-policing activities. As I said, this is a bold move, but it would show that the chief and the commission are committed to effective leadership, not only for the department, but for the entire Los Angeles community. And finally, to the extent systems are employed to identify communities and individuals as subjects to predictive policing, the department must be totally transparent in advance of their adoption and include the public in that decision making. It also must adopt only systems that are equally transparent and further subject them to audits and ongoing monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here this morning.
Now we'll have the department. I believe Chief Malinowski is going to start for the department, and there'll be a number of presenters coming forward. If we could have the second presenter from the department come forward and save some time, so whoever that's going to be. Chief Franks, thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Sean Malinowski. I'm the Chief of Detectives for the Los Angeles Police Department. And I'm going to...
Good morning, Chief.
Good morning. I'm going to introduce our speakers. And at first, I just wanted to start with an overview and address why we're here today as Police Department. And we're here to talk about this evolution in technology that's occurred over the last 30 or 40 years, resulting in what we have now, and to acknowledge that there's healthy criticism in the community, and that there are civil rights concerns, and that we're not here as a reluctant participant in these discussions. We are fortunate to have a type of government in the city of Los Angeles where we have civilian oversight of the police, and we believe that the people are the police, one of our tenets going back in time. And so we acknowledge that there are legitimate concerns. Anytime, the police are vested with great power to deny people their freedom, and so we understand that we need to have these discussions. So it's in that spirit that we are here today, and we're going to talk about some of the issues that came up. I thought we had a very good overview from the Inspector General that shows what's happened over time, both in Los Angeles and in other cities, to try to be more exact about what's happening with crime. And there are issues when it comes to crime stats, for instance, and I acknowledge that there may be built-in biases to that as reported crime, but we are trying to get better. And what we're trying to do, and it was acknowledged in the Inspector General presentation, is we're trying to get better at identifying where we should place very scarce police resources to prevent a crime from happening in the first place. And that's really the whole focus of what we're trying to do, is to reduce victimization in
Excuse me, just if I could just ask the audience's indulgence. This is a difficult and complex but incredibly important conversation, and I would simply request that we give the department the opportunity to speak and be heard, and subsequent to that, we will... I'm sorry?
What about EL4?
Subsequent to that, there will be additional opportunity for public comment and commission comment. So if you would just allow this presentation to move forward in the same spirit that the first three move forward, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
So today we are going to have who I consider to be the department experts on these issues. Deputy Chief Horace Frank, Dennis Cotto, and Phil Tengrides will come up and discuss different concerns and what we're actually using in terms of technology and how it's being used. And it's many of the things will be addressed that came up in the earlier presentation. So Horace Frank will be talking first, and he'll talk about some of the things that are used in Counterterrorism Bureau and try to separate fact from fiction on those issues, and talk about what we actually do. And then Dennis Cotto will come up and he'll talk about laser and PredPol, which have been talked about already. And then Phil Tengrides will come up and he will talk about the Community Safety Operations Center and about community safety partnerships. And then I'll come back and wrap up, and then I understand there's some questions that will be submitted. So with that, ma'am, I'd like to turn it over to Chief Frank.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. As indicated, my name is Horace Frank. I'm the commanding officer of the Department's Counterterrorism and Special Operations Bureau. There are about 5 different areas that I'm going to briefly discuss with you. The first is cellular communications interception technology. So the Los Angeles Police Department utilizes cellular communications interception technology in support of criminal apprehension efforts and in emergency situations to locate at-risk persons or missing children. The use of this technology is strictly regulated by state law and department directives. It is important to note that this technology can only be used by...
Please, I just want to acknowledge the woman in the center here. I appreciate your comments. If you could simply hold them till public comment and speak after the department's made its presentation, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. It is important to note that this technology can only be used by authorized personnel assigned to the department's Major Crimes Division, and for them to use it, they must have a warrant signed by a judge and then with the approval of their commanding officer of Major Crimes Division. In those emergency cases when the time required to get an approval from a judge could end up placing a victim's life in peril, the Deputy Chief Commanding Officer of Counterterrorism and Special Operations Bureau, in that case myself, can authorize the use of this technology. In my absence, this authorization must come from the Chief of Detectives, who is a Deputy Chief, or the Director of the Office of Special Operations, who is an Assistant Chief. The point being here is that it requires someone at the Chief's level to authorize the use of this technology in an emergency situation. But even in a situation such as this, a warrant must still be sought within 3 days of using this technology. There are some important points that I'd like to make. One, this particular technology that we use is only capable of locating a cellular phone. It does not reveal text messages or listen in on telephone conversations. At the conclusion of the operation, all data relative to this device are deleted. Lastly, I'd like to point out that Stingray and Trapwire technologies are no longer used by the Los Angeles Police Department. The next area that I'd like to discuss is the Suspicious Activity Reporting, commonly known as SAR. So the Suspicious Activity Report Unit within Major Crimes Division was created to ensure that information potentially related to terrorism would be gathered, assessed, maintained, and provided to the appropriate investigative entity. It is the department's policy to gather and use this information only in a way that respects the constitutional rights and privacy of all persons. Our SAR reporting process is regulated by rules set forth in Special Order Number 17, dated August 28th of 2012. All SAR reports taken by a department employee, as well as iWatch LA and other public tips, are forwarded to the SAR unit for processing. If this information in the report meets the criteria as outlined in the National SAR Initiative, the report is accepted and forwarded to the Joint Regional Intelligence Center for assignment to the appropriate investigative entity. It is important to note that each of the 16 indicators that make up the SAR criteria is strictly based on behavior that could indicate intelligence gathering or pre-operational planning related to a terrorism or other criminal activity. None of these indicators that make up the criteria is based on an individual's race, sex, ethnicity, national origin, or religious affiliation. Again, it is the person's behavior as it relates to the 16 factors that create the suspicion. Additionally, and this is very important, the criteria must be accompanied by articulable facts and circumstances that support suspicion that the behavior observed is reasonably indicative of criminal activity associated with terrorism. The next area is the Joint Regional Intelligence Center. So the Joint Regional Intelligence Center has one mission, and that mission is to protect the people, infrastructure, and economy of the Central District of California from terrorism. They do so by collecting, analyzing, and sharing information with local, state, tribal, and our federal partners. The Joint Regional Intelligence Center is comprised of members from approximately 20 agencies, all organized into several units. Two examples of those units are the Critical Infrastructure Protection Unit and the Situational Awareness Watch. So as it pertains to the Critical Infrastructure Protection Unit, their job is to conduct vulnerability assessments of key public and private infrastructure locations, and then provide options for considerations to those operators of those facilities on things that they can do to improve the physical security of their properties. This is key because 80% of our critical infrastructure is privately owned. The next unit, as an example, is our Situational Awareness Unit. This unit provides timely situational awareness alerts, notifications, event threat assessments, such as threat assessments for the LA Marathon, the Academy Awards, New Year's Eve, and other major celebratory events. The Situational Awareness Watch Unit also provides actionable intelligence to local law enforcement, public health, and public safety communities. The next area is that of facial recognition. So facial recognition technology is used by the Los Angeles Police Department investigators to identify photographs of a criminal suspect whose identity is not known. The facial recognition used by the LAPD is managed by the Los Angeles, the Los Angeles County Regional Identification System. It is important to note that this system does not use driver's license photos. The system only uses booking photographs, or what we commonly know as mugshots, from 9 counties. Use of the system amounts to nothing more than an automated query of booking photographs or mugshots to see if the photograph of an unidentified criminal suspect resembles that of a mugshot that's within the system. The important point here is that we do not arrest someone solely because the booking photograph resembles the photograph in the mugshot. In a case of a hit, what we will do is that we will do further investigation to ensure that the person sought is indeed the person identified in the facial recognition query. Again, some important points to note here. The system can only be used by investigators who have a right to know and a need to know. The facial recognition technology used by the department does not, and I stress, does not randomly scan crowds in public places for comparison. The department does not use digital in-car video or body-worn video for facial recognition. The facial recognition system managed by the Los Angeles County Regional Identification System is the only system used by the Los Angeles Police Department. The final area that I'd like to touch on is the automated license plate recognition system. This is a type of technology that uses a series of cameras mounted on police vehicles and at fixed locations to read the license plate of each vehicle that passes within the range of the camera. Each camera is connected to a database that immediately checks the license plate of the vehicle against a database of other license plates that are known or believed to be involved in criminal activity. The LAPD has used the LPR technology since 2006, and our LPR technology was purchased using federal funds. We currently have about 300 cars that are equipped with LPR across the city of Los Angeles. All access to the data is done through Palantir. This requires you to log in, and then it tracks the purpose of your inquiry, so there's a very good system in terms of tracking those who enter the system. The data in our LPR system is only shared with other law enforcement agencies. We do not share this information with private entities, and that is very key for us. We share this information directly with the LA County Sheriff's Department and the Long Beach Police Department, and any other entities, law enforcement entities who require this information must do so via the Joint Regional Intelligence Center. All the data is stored locally within the LAPD data center, and our retention policy for the information follows that of the city. Commissioners, that's all the information I had at this time.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief Frank. Can I
The
get
next
Chief
presenter.
Conrad?
Good morning to the Commission. I'm Deputy Chief Dennis Cotto, currently assigned to Operation South Bureau as the commanding officer. I'm going to talk this morning about Operation Laser, Predpol, and Palantir. This is what we are doing. Operation Laser, Laser stands for Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration Project. It's a strategy used to lower the incidence of violent gun-related crimes. The concept of Laser is to reduce violent crime without disrupting the community. The emphasis is on identifying the cause of the violence and trying to develop a strategy to mitigate this problem without resorting to what I would term saturation policing. This strategy was developed in 2010 in Newton area under a Department of Justice grant. Newton area was selected for several reasons. high number of shootings, number of shooting victims, and gang violence over the years. Its density of gangs, 44 active gangs in its boundaries, and it had not been subject to any prior or current research. Operation Laser is not a predictive model. Operation Laser analyzes 10 years of an area's violent gun crimes, those are reported crimes over the past 10 years, and identifies corridors where those crimes have been persistent. This analysis is done by crime analysts and reviewed by command officers. A computer algorithm does not identify the laser zones. And what should not come as a surprise is there are no residential streets that are laser zones. They're mostly high traffic thoroughfares, such as Vermont, Hollywood Boulevard, Oceanfront Walk in Venice. Major thoroughfares that have businesses and a lot of foot traffic is what we're finding with the laser zones. Areas focus their crime reduction strategies in these zones for a period of 9 to 12 months, at which time the crime within the laser zone is reevaluated. Once laser zones are identified, areas attempt to identify locations, which we call anchor points, and offenders, chronic offenders, within these zones that may be contributing to the crime. In addition, areas are tasked with using a variety of strategies in their efforts to reduce violence in these zones. These strategies include traditional policing methods in addition to utilizing community partnerships to reduce the incidence of crime. And as an example, I wanted to give 2 examples. We had an incident by South Park in Newton area where we saw a number of street robberies involving guns along the park. Motor officers were assigned to the area and were told to identify what they believe was the causal factor in why those robberies were occurring. In their analysis, they found out that there was a senior citizen home just off the corner of the park that the gang members were running into as they saw police units. So what the officers did was partnered with the community center or the senior citizen home and actually just sat there with the senior citizens and parked their bikes in front. Without any arrests, without any increase in citations, we saw the incidents of those robberies disappear. And then the relationship with that senior citizen home became stronger, graffiti was removed, and we haven't seen the robberies come back to that area since that intervention. So that's just one way I believe we're using non-traditional policing methods to correct or try to reduce the incidence of crime. The other area was Strawberry Square at Rosecrans, Vermont. What we were seeing was a large number of aggravated assaults and fights breaking out there. What we learned by sending officers into that area were when school let out, a number of the buses were dropping off their kids there, and they were coming from different various areas of South LA, so we were having a lot of gang-on-gang issues there. Working with MTA and working with the school districts, we were able to time the buses so that we didn't have a congregation of youth in that area, and we saw a reduction in the crime by just changing bus schedules and moving where the buses were actually dropping off the kids in that area. What we're trying to do is disrupt the ability to commit crime, and we're trying to move away from productivity-based measures to measuring whether there's an absence of crime and how that's being done by the officers. We're trying to move away from just strategizing as arresting our way out of this problem or using tickets, but I want them to really think outside the box in trying to prevent or reduce the incidence of crimes in these laser zones. Using laser, Newton area reduced its homicide by 59% in its first year. Newton area averaged approximately 40 homicides a year prior to the implementation of laser, but since the implementation of laser, Newton has not seen over 20 homicides since 2011. In March of 2016, laser was utilized by the Community Safety Operations Center, CSOC, to stem the rise of gun violence that we were seeing in Newton area, Southwest area, 77th Street area, and Southeast area. I think it's important for the Commission to know those 4 areas alone accounted for 48% of the city's violent gun crimes. It proved to be effective, and the decision was made to expand the use of laser department-wide. Operation Laser is currently being used in 15 areas. It is anticipated that all 21 areas will have identified laser zones by early 2019. Now I'll go back to anchor points and what that means. Once a laser zone is identified, officers are asked to go into that area and, using their experience and expertise, identify what might be the causal factor in why violent crime has been persistent. And that could be a problem liquor store, it could be a bus stop, it could be poor lighting, But once they can determine what the problem is, then we have various other tools other than policing to probably mitigate these locations, such as if it is a problem liquor store, we can work with Alcohol Bureau, Alcohol Beverage and Control, to try to work with the owner on modifying some of their business practices. Do they stay open as late as they do, if that's what we're seeing with the crime pattern? Do we ask them to hire a security guard to be present on the premises? Do we ask them to put better lighting in the back of their store? If it is a problem location, an abandoned building, I'll work with the city attorney's office for boarding up that location. We can work with the city attorney to try to abate that location. Number of tools. If it happens to be a bus stop, such as the example I gave you, we would work with MTA, we would work with schools to really move around those factors that we believe are causing crime. So that's what we're asking. Each area, each laser zone, we are asking them to try to identify 2 to 3 potential anchor points, and then ask them to create strategies, and we monitor those strategies to see if it's effective and whether it's moving toward the direction that we're trying to move toward, which is the absence of crime. Now, recognizing that the most controversial aspect of laser is chronic offenders, the chronic offender program was developed to try and identify the most violent gun offender in a community. Recognizing that not all gang members are violent, and recognizing that a small portion of gangs or small portions of the criminals are what we would call shooters or people that would use a gun. We're trying to use some type of measure to separate them or identify them from the rest of the offenders in the community. It's used to familiarize officers to these offenders. The intent is to focus on these offenders to minimize random stops of citizens that are detrimental to building community trust, as was presented by Mr. Khan and I think by the ACLU. What we're trying to do is traditional policing, we always knew who the bad guys were. Community knows who the bad people are in their community. What we're trying to do is make sure that we are not randomly stopping others in the community that are not involved in criminal activity, and how do we best do that? And if I could maturize my officers to recognizing who those violent criminals are in their areas, that's what we're trying to work toward.
Please, let him finish.
Chronic offenders are identified by crime analysts at the areas. It's not done through a computer algorithm. Race, gender, and ethnicity are not factors used to identify chronic offenders. Mr. Khan already covered the point system that is currently in use. We do not arrest or detain based solely on these bulletins. The officers must still independently develop the reasonable suspicion or probable cause to detain or arrest a chronic offender. No surveillance is conducted on chronic offenders. The bulletins clearly state not wanted at this time, not to be used as a sole basis for your probable cause to detain the individual. Area crime intelligence details review their chronic offenders weekly. A letter is sent to the chronic offender stating that they have been identified as having frequent contact with law enforcement. The letter informs the offender of the various programs available to assist them in their rehabilitation. The hope is that the letters will deter these offenders from committing future crimes. Now with PredPol. PredPol is short for predictive policing. It is a strategy used to lower the incidence of property crime. Currently, areas are using PredPol in their efforts to reduce vehicle-related crimes. An example, GTAs and burglary from motor vehicles. PredPol does use a computer algorithm to analyze 10+ years of an area's property crime. PredPol utilizes this data to identify 500 feet by 500 feet boxes which have a high probability of that type of crime occurring. There are 4 factors that are used in the algorithm: type of crime, day of week, time of day, and location. Individual names or identifiers are not in the algorithm. No personal information is considered. The focus is on places, not people. Officers are asked to drive through and/or stay in these boxes during the prescribed times to increase visibility. PredPol's strategy is predicated on the concept that the mere presence of officers will reduce these types of crimes from occurring. What we are also learning is that driving to and from these boxes may also be having an effect on property crime. Often, PredPol boxes are causing officers to patrol areas or drive through areas that do not regularly see patrol. Palantir. Palantir is a computer platform and application that accesses already established criminal justice databases. Palantir has given the LAPD the ability to analyze crime data faster and with more accuracy. This data assists commanding officers in identifying trends and patterns so that the appropriate strategy can be utilized. Palantir then assists the commanding officers with gathering the data to evaluate the success of that strategy. Commanding officers are now able to deploy their resources in the right spots with better information as to what is occurring at that location. This platform has allowed for quicker maturation of our commanders as to an area's specific crime trends and rhythm. So, those are the 3 areas that I had to cover today, so thank you very much for allowing me to cover those, and I'll be here for questions.
Thank you. Chief Chief.
Good morning. My name is Phil Tingarides, and I am the Commanding Officer of Transit Services Bureau, and I'm here to talk today about the Community Operations, Safety Operations Center, and also the Community Safety Partnership. I'm going to start off with the Community Safety Operations Center, and essentially it's a name for a tactic. It's or a strategy, I should say. It is a group of folks that are in a command post who monitor the radio from 6 in the morning until usually 2 in the morning during the summer hours or summer time. During that time, they collect crime information for the last 24 hours. They work through and pull together any information that has follow-up ability. We have detectives that are out at night who respond out to crime scenes, specifically violent crime like shootings, that sort of thing. And then every morning at 10 o'clock, there is a conference call that includes the commanding officers from all of the areas. During that time, they review the crime, specifically violent crime, in the last 24 hours. They make evaluations of any patterns, of any issues that we need to get a hold of intervention and work together with intervention to stop feuds that may be going on between neighborhoods. And also during that daily conference call, the resources that have been set aside to deal with crime are assigned to the areas, and then the commanding officers will give specific missions to those units for the next 24 hours. Part of CSOC is having roll call in the field, so if there's a specific area that's having a problem with violent crime, the officers, oncoming officers will have their roll call out in those areas. They'll mix and mingle with people in the community. Generally, those kind of roll calls will get a lot of attention. People come up and ask questions, and it gives the officers an ability to exchange information with people in the neighborhood. Currently, the CSOC is operating in all 4 bureaus, and we have focused primarily on violent crime in South and Central Bureau, and we work very closely with the community. We have the council offices are on those phone calls, as well as intervention. Community Safety Partnership Program was born out of mistrust and was implemented at the end of 2011. It was primarily implemented in public housing developments in Watts, also in Hollenbeck there was a location. The whole purpose of the Community Safety Partnership was to put officers into the community and not to be focused on arrests, but to be focused on building relationships.
Excuse me, sir.
Getting to know.
Oh, you're asking me to move?
Would you please, Mr. Herman, would you please find a seat in the row behind you? Thank you. You can lower your arm.
Come on.
Continue.
Thank you. It was a focus on relationship-based policing, on cultural-based policing, to get officers into the community and get to know people within the community, understand the culture within the community and how that community operates so that we can better police that community together. There was programming that was included with that included Girl Scouts programs, participation in Summer Night Lights, Sunburst Youth Academy, which is an intervention or a prevention program where kids would voluntarily go to school and get diversion to try and change some of the issues in their lives that they were unhappy with and that could make them be able to be ready for jobs and for education. Operation Progress and a couple of different mentoring programs involving USC, UCLA students to focus on education. Watts Bears, Ramona Tigers were football programs, Pueblo United football programs that involved 8 to 13-year-olds. Again, all of these programs that they had were focused on issues that would help young people, one, build relationships with officers, with role models. They had worked on self-discipline, on team building, and they're focused around education as part of the football programs that includes schoolwork and summer school programs. They had a track program, Starbase STEM Academy, where all the kids in 5th grade in Watts were taken down to Los Alamitos and attended a week of STEM classes. All of these programs were meant to build relationships and work with the community in a very different way. What ultimately, the result, especially in Watts, we started this program at the end of 2011. In Watts in 2011, there was 21 homicides. The program still continues today, and so far this year in Watts, there has been 2 homicides, one of which was an accidental shooting. So we've seen a tremendous drop in the violent crime that sustained itself, primarily focused on partnering with the community, working together with the community, and a community who now, instead of being at odds with the police department, works very carefully and closely with the police department. I might add that in August of 2015, during a 2-week period, there was a violence uptick that saw 52 people shot and 17 people were killed in that 2-week period. During that time, there was a council motion to expand the CSP program and also to provide a response. Part of that response was the Community Safety Operations Center, and the expansion of the Community Safety Partnership went into Newton Division in the Pueblos and has also gone into Harvard Park, where the year prior to implementing in Harvard Park, there had been 4 homicides directly around the park, and so far we have had none. It was implemented in September last year, so we're coming up on the first year. In addition, South Park is in the process of putting together a CSP zone. It takes a while because part of it is going out, meeting with the community to find out what the community is looking for so that we can work together as a partner.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Malnowski, you'll be wrapping up.
Yes, ma'am. So today we try to provide some answers to questions about the programs that we're using in those 3 areas. And in preparing for this meeting, we've already identified concerns that were brought up by the Inspector General, and we will be working with the Commission and with the Inspector General to look at what we're doing and see how it conforms and what changes we need to make to be more transparent and more in line with community expectations.
Thank you. Chief, did you have anything that you wanted to add at this time?
Thank you, Commissioner, and my thanks to the leadership team that provided the high-level overview regarding these data systems. I want to echo the remarks and frame it in just a couple points. First, that our efforts in policing Los Angeles, this shared responsibility of public safety, is critically upon building trust, the trust of all the communities that we serve. So any data system that we gather, any of our efforts, we recognize clearly can have an implication of undermining that trust. Consistent with President Obama's 21st Century Policing report is awareness of how data can undermine confidence in policing, and systems and strategies can do so as well. We also recognize that when we talk about crime, that these are imperfect measures. Much, in fact, the majority of crime is actually not reported. And that includes shooting violence. So we recognize that our efforts here in looking at data is that the data is not clean, and that we have to recognize its inherent imperfections. Additionally, the importance of community awareness, such as this meeting and other meetings, in describing how these systems actually work cannot be overstated, and our commitment is to continue those conversations. And then lastly, the support of critically analyzing the impact and the utility of Predpol as well as LASER, both of those systems which are subject to today's criticism, is something that I welcome. I welcome whether it be by the Office of the Inspector General, or I will see that we will do this analysis internally as well. But I believe that the underlying effort here is in building trust. It's critical to echo what the ACLU identified, and that is that the identification of communities in need of intervention and prevention is what we're trying to do. And we recognize that data as a means of trying to make that identification. And we support that with these efforts, and we're committed to ensuring that the process is fair, as transparent as possible, and that it is effective. And when those three things aren't accomplished, we will change.
No, thank you very much, Chief. I appreciate that. The department will remain in attendance so that you can respond to questions as they arise, but you don't have to stay at the desk at this moment. Are we?
Yes, just to facilitate for the commissioners, if you have any questions of the Inspector General's office, then this would be the appropriate time to ask those. And after that, then we'll transition to Stop LAPD Spying, the ACLU, and then lastly the department. So at this point, if the commissioners have any questions for the Inspector General's office, or they wish to have any comments from what they've heard, that would be the appropriate time.
Actually, I have a number of comments, and I want to first begin by thanking all of the presenters today, both those that are part of the commission, the Inspector General's office, the department, and also significantly those outside presenters. This is a critical topic and one that we are just beginning to grapple with from the perspective of oversight. To the Chief's point, it is critical that it's important that these programs be understood, that they be not only transparent and effective, but that they also be accountable, and that involves some outside and independent review of what is taking place to ensure that it is both, that these programs are and strategies are constitutional, that they are implemented in a bias-free manner, that we are looking at the impacts of these various strategies on communities, that we're assessing not just the benefit but the cost, and any significant cost relative to public trust is something that we should take very, very seriously. I think the Inspector General's report did an excellent job of framing the issues that we should, from an oversight perspective, be thinking about, and would be interested in seeing a more formal review of the database or data-driven policing strategies that were presented today. And specifically, first, a more formal review in general. Specifically, I'm very concerned about the chronic offender bulletins, and in particular, those programs that are people-based as opposed to place-based in terms of both how they're constructed, what the impact are, how they are protective of civil liberties. I'm extremely concerned about designations that might encourage surveillance, impermissible scrutiny. We do have to be mindful of the impacts of stops, in particular protectual stops in communities anywhere in the city, but in particular communities of color. And I'd be very interested in an evaluation and specific recommendations with respect to that program, as well as an overall analysis and some recommendations about the kinds of oversight that might be provided by this commission. There are a number of things that were mentioned, including independent audits of algorithms. It's one thing to say that these are fair and effective and done using the proper inputs. It's another thing to demonstrate that, and there, I am certain, are ways of doing that do not burden the effectiveness of the program, but that give us assurance and that provide the assurance to the community that these are done in a fair and unbiased manner. And I think we should look at those, explore those, and would like to see some feedback around some of those recommendations as well. In the overall, each of the presenters, and I know that they've been identified as critiques of the department, I think, that's fair, and the chief has indicated that he welcomes scrutiny. We certainly welcome scrutiny, and it is our job to provide oversight. I think each of the presentations brought forward some interesting recommendations. I'd like for you to look at those recommendations and again come back to this commission with an overall analysis and with some suggestions about how we might move forward in terms of constructing some architecture around oversight as it relates to this kind of activity. It is the wave of the future. And we've got to begin to think about how we participate in ensuring that that aspect of our operations is consistent and supported and effective. And those are my comments. Are there any other questions or comments by commissioners before we move forward to public comment? Commissioner Goldsmith.
I want to thank you for your leadership. This is an extraordinary hearing, and really appreciated all the presentations we got today from the department, the Inspector General, and the ACLU and Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Tons of extremely useful information and really important scrutiny on issues that I care deeply about, and I know the rest of us do. And just really appreciate what you just laid out in terms of next steps, and the report from the Inspector General, very thorough, and I look forward to supporting that effort and seeing the results of it, particularly the recommendations for improvement, and appreciate Chief Moore's openness to scrutiny, and the department acknowledged they've already identified some opportunities for improvement. Appreciate that. And really just, I mean, for all the reasons folks said today, these issues are of great concern, especially in low-income communities of color, and I am especially concerned about any disparate impact that might be resulting from any of these practices, while acknowledging and assuming the accuracy of the data in terms of effectiveness in reducing crime, but also wanting to make sure that we're fully examining all of the impacts in our kind of cost-benefit analysis. And would like to hear more from the department briefly, if you'd be willing to share a little bit more about how do you look at the broader impacts of these programs on trust, on particularly in communities of color, on civil liberties. I mean, how is that measured and examined when you plan these programs, when you evaluate their success? And you listed a number of really good examples of sort of non-traditional interventions, partnerships with communities or community-based organizations, and other ways to both mitigate the potential negative impacts of these interventions while also building trust and engaging the whole community in making us all safe. And so just would like to hear more about how we can think about expanding those programs to make them more sort of become traditional policing, more a regular and institutionalized part of public safety in Los Angeles.
Yes, ma'am. So this is an area where we can improve in terms of measuring public sentiment relative to enforcement action that we might be taking. And I think what's happened is over time, as crime analysis has evolved, it wasn't as if we changed from one day to the next, but it was an evolution of how we do our crime analysis. And really, the one way that we've been looking at it is through an annual community survey. And what we're exploring doing is more of a 365-day-a-year approach, and a way where we can get to populations that you can't get by doing once-a-year telephone interviews. And so there is some technology available where we can place ads on people's smartphones, and if they choose to participate, they can provide us with feedback. And a couple of good things about that is we could be doing that all the time, and so it would be more sensitive to changes. So for instance, if you had something happen in a neighborhood and you, right now, really to gauge public sentiment about an incident or about a practice that we have, we rely on senior lead officers going out there and talking to people. We rely on our CPAB or our community police advisory boards, but many times these are people who are already very friendly to the police, and the feedback may not be as objective as we would like to get. So if we can have people participate via these cell phone surveys, we believe we could do a better job of knowing and being more sensitive to changes in the neighborhood and down to the neighborhood level. So that is one thing we're exploring doing this year.
And I'll strengthen that just out of fairness to the Chief of Detectives. As a department initiative this year is to implement ongoing surveys within communities down to the neighborhood level. As the Commission was reminded last week with the sentiment, customer service sentiment as to use of force, trust in the organization, it clearly is in communities of colors where we suffer our poorest performance, if you will. And we need to benchmark that more regularly and at a micro neighborhood level, and that's where engagement, I've tasked Chief Villegas with finding funding for that. We're committed to finding that funding either internally or to seek it via this commission to the City Council. An organization of our size and complexity to not know customer sentiment when you're a customer service business is something that we have to move beyond debating, and we have to implement. Secondly is community engagement. As much as we are talking about crime data and we talk about arrests and outcomes, we need to look at the means of which we're doing our engagement. And in the Office of Operations, my previous assignment was an initiative in this last year that we've begun that now Chief Arcos is championing and moving forward, and that is to actually engage, count and understand across the organization informal meetings, conversations between officers and the various communities that make up our activities. Understand those youth groups. When Chief Tangarides spoke, obviously he spoke from his perspective and background in South Los Angeles. I need to ensure that that happens in every part of the city, and also to see how it changes over time with a commitment of building trust.
A couple things. I'm sorry, just Chief. I think Ms. Ochoa in her presentation referenced both New Orleans and Richmond, and it ties to the presentation made by Chief Tangarides. And in all three of those instances, the point that was being made was that data relative to violence, crime, etc., that the most effective or that the interventions that were most effective were those interventions that weren't reliant solely on suppression, and in fact, that were less reliant on suppression, but that were reliant more on identifying underlying deficits and community-based interventions. And I'm curious as to the degree to which we have thought about how to embrace and champion a more holistic approach to making communities safe. I mean, the real central, I think, or the underlying critique around some of this data separate and apart, or these strategies separate and apart from the integrity of the data, how they're shared, the transparency, and those other issues. One of the central critiques is one around the utilization of that data. Is it utilized to increase suppression and to target or to increase resources in particular communities, or is that data used in a way that is more supportive, or that could be more supportive of those communities? It's really a question about how you achieve safety. And I guess I would be remiss from my perspective, were we not to get some feedback around that issue and the department's perspective on that issue.
So absolutely, and we're talking about data here, but to talk about this solution, the remedies, the interventions, the prevention, that is our philosophy. As Chief Cotto indicated, it's not the matter of making arrests as the evidence of our efforts. It's how do we stop or prevent or prevent the crime from occurring in the first place, provide for community safety. Examples of that and how data drives and informs those prevention strategies, which many times are outside the control or dominion of the police department, involve the Unified Homeless Response Center that has been recently stood up in the Emergency Management Department that is made up of a consortium of people around support and agencies that deal with the challenges and the difficulties of people experiencing homelessness, where the police department has one of the chairs, and we're not the leader of that conversation. Secondly, GRID, I think, is a powerful example of how data informs intervention and prevention services, as the crime data involving violence and other social conditions within neighborhoods prioritizes neighborhoods for added resources, and something that the department fully cooperates and pushes and ensures to make as informed, provide as much information as possible so that those decision makers within the city can determine the prioritization. Examples further, when we talk about GRID zones, those zones are much the same as what we see here with LASER. Similarly, Summer Night Lights and Friday Night Lights programs, engagements in communities, again, are driven by partially by metrics such as crime data. So I think those are examples of efforts to try to use alternatives to policing.
Thank you. Before we move to public comment, there's been a request for a break at the dais. There are only 3 of us present, so we'll need a few-minute break so that we can use the bathroom, since we will lose our quorum by walking out of the room. I'm sorry? Yeah, we're going to move to public comment. So when we come back, we'll be at public comment. So thank you. We are at, what is this, a recess? We're at recess.
Temporary recess, about 5 minutes. Just be a brief recess. We have to do this since we only have 3 members. If one steps away, we lose a quorum. That's why we have to take a break.
Thank you. We'd like to resume our meeting. We have a number of comments, I think 30 or more on this item, and then another 17 in public comments. So we'd like to get started. We are, just as a note, I think Mr. T-Fink indicated at the beginning of the meeting that we have a hard out time, so we will be leaving this meeting room at 12:30. Is that right, Mr. T-Fink? Is that our hard out?
That's correct, ma'am. There's another city meeting in this room scheduled at 1 p.m. We have to transition out at 12:30.
So I say that just by way of encouraging all of the speakers to try to stay to their 2 minutes, and so that we can both hear from all of the speakers, and also so that we have an opportunity to address questions back to the department at the end of public comment, or at the end of this item, assuming that that we have enough remaining time. So with that, we can have our first speaker.
Okay, our first 3 speakers, we have Lynn Lomicro, Gina Viola, and Peter Polak. Polnick.
Would you just?
I'm not Lynn.
It's okay. I think that.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Gina Viola, and I'm here to speak about Predpol and Laser. Claims to be unbiased, but in determining hotspots and chronic offenders, relies on data that is biased. Reliance on gang data, which we know is fundamentally flawed. An audit by the California State Auditor that agencies lacked adequate support for 13 of the 100 people reviewed in CalGang, and for 23% of the CalGang criteria entries we reviewed. The database sample also included 42 individuals who were supposedly under the age of 1 when the data was entered, including 28 of those admitting to being gang members under the age of 1. Additionally, more than 600 people had purge dates far beyond the 5-year mandatory limit for removing people from database if they have not reoffended or had their file updated. Reliance on field identification cards, which studies in other locations indicate are fraught with racial disparities, as they are in this city. For example, a study was conducted in Miami that examined over 60,000 stops and found that amongst other racial disparities, officers were more than twice as likely to complete an FI card for a black driver than for a white driver. We would like to study this data here in Los Angeles, but our requests for that data have been denied. We've asked for that data over and over again, and we know what this amounts to. At the core of all these programs is behavioral surveillance, and who is surveilled is always the black and brown communities based on pseudoscience. Predictive policing is nothing more than racial profiling hidden behind the veil of scientific and mathematical modeling. It is ineffective and dangerous. We have outbursts in this room because we know you won't ask the hard questions. We've watched you ignore the community's rejection of drones, and we watched you rubber stamp it over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Polak. Lynn, are you Lynn?
I'm Lynn.
Okay, good.
Okay, so, hi, I just wanted to start off by making a couple of observations. As Hamid and Jamie began their presentation, I watched all of you. And I find this extremely disconcerting and extremely disrespectful to invite us out here and during their presentation for all of your faces to be down, to be looking on your phones, to not even give the semblance that you're paying attention. And then another observation. This gentleman over here in the corner, on a couple of occasions, my interactions with him, I don't know, just felt some hostility. And you talk a lot about trust. You talk about the police being here as arbiters of public safety. I don't come to these meetings often. In fact, probably by looking at me, if you knew a little bit more about where I work, my income, where I live, you wouldn't be treating me like that, I know it. So I think it says a lot in just observing the way you interacted with me, the way all of the rest of the officers have interacted with people from the Stop LAPD spying side, and the differences between the way you've interacted and paid attention to the lady from the ACLU. So I think that needs to be said. I think you all need to be called out on that, because I think that's bullshit. I only have 8 seconds left, but I just want to make this first point, and I want to reiterate it. Hamid already made it. But Laser draws on technology provided by Palantir. Palantir is a big data company that mines government and corporate databases. Palantir's founder and largest shareholder, Peter Thiel, is a prominent advisor to and supporter of Donald Trump.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
The next speaker, please, Dante Ivory, followed by Jerry Dietrich.
Hello, my name is Dante Ivory. I just really want to comment on, more so on invasion on privacy. Like 2 days ago, the gentleman that has on the roll, church hat, there shouldn't be an invasion on privacy by the police if certain things are going on, like if there isn't gang wars or prostitution or anything like that going on, especially with the church that was going on, they circling around the block multiple times. There weren't anything going on as far as that, but also too, invasion on my privacy as well. I deal with a lot of stuff with the police. There should be no kisses blown towards me from male officers at all. If I'm not doing anything that is disrespectful, I don't disrespect the police at all. I get unfair treatment from the police. A lot of the times I get followed because of what I'm involved in. And I just feel like the treatment from the police should be a lot better than what it is. I'm here. I'm still learning a lot about this coalition. So I just want to say that I'm grateful for every person that's on the commission. I respect you. I don't want to disrespect anyone, and everyone that's in the crowd, I respect everyone, and I'm grateful to be here. I don't have really much more to say, but thank you for everyone that is here. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jerry Dietrich, and I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. We demand a thoroughly detailed audit of predictive policing programs, including PredPol and Operation Laser. In early May this year, we delivered an email and letter to the Office of Inspector General Mark Smith and all 5 commissioners demanding the immediate dismantling, rescinding, and auditing of LAPD predictive policing program. We have not received a response from OIG. This is a completely unacceptable action from an independent watchdog that is supposed to serve the people and provide information and analysis regarding the conduct and performance of the LAPD. We also demand an audit of the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program, SAR program. The last audit was conducted in 2015. Throughout the audit of the SAR program, we saw overwhelmingly evidence of racial profiling. I want to leave you with this thought. Even the National Academy of Sciences has expressed deep skepticism about behavioral surveillance and data mining, saying it will lead to false positives, invasion of privacy, and misuse and abuse of data. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker, Melina Ryman, followed by Tiffany Guerra. Melina Ryman. Tiffany Guerra. Mimi Solstic.
Okay, so I'd like to start by addressing the statement made by LAPD today that we do not engage in the surveillance of chronic offenders. We all heard that, right? And I'm going to refer now to documents that were obtained by the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition following a request for public information, which it took months for the LAPD to respond to, by the way. In the document by JSS, titled The Smart Policing Initiative in the LAPD, an evaluation of Operation Laser, the document notes how crime intelligence details identified 15 to 50 chronic violent offenders within their divisions for monitoring and surveillance. In a second document regarding preliminary results of Laser, also from JSS, we read how, with respect to the chronic violent offenders, the following interventions are taking place. The increase of surveillance activities of chronic offenders within hotspot areas by patrol and parole compliance units. Many of the chronic offenders are on probation or parole and are subject to increased scrutiny. Further, the use of license plate readers may be useful in tracking potential suspects, and by placing them on streets in hotspot areas, investigators will be able to obtain data on specific vehicles driven by chronic offenders. So your LAPD sits here and tells us that these are not predictive programs, that Laser is not a predictive program, and that chronic offenders are not surveilled. In your own documents going back to 2012 and in 2015 and all the range of time between then, in the documents that you have that JSS has been giving to you, reporting to you on quarterly and biannually and annually basis, you are told how these are predictive programs and how folks are being surveilled. What the fuck is going on? How can you sit here and tell the community and tell this board that folks are not being surveilled when you're in your own documents? This is stated. You're lying to the community. What further evidence do we need that an audit is needed? We need an audit of these programs immediately. Shut down these programs.
Maybe Soltysik, followed by Amanda Riggle.
My name is Mimi Soltysik. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. Cynthia McCain-Hill, you mentioned a bit ago that you'd like to see an absence of bias in these programs. These programs are inherently racist, and the only way you're going to see an absence of bias here is to get rid of the program. Anything short of that, basically what you're asking for is a kinder, gentler racism. And I'm wondering if that's a negotiation that you're willing to have publicly, to negotiate for a kinder, gentler racism. Are you comfortable with the public seeing that negotiation? And I'd also like to ask Shane Goldsmith, I'm just curious, when you're asking an institution in the police that's racist by design, when you're asking them about public trust, what kind of answer is it that you're looking for? What do you expect? And you know, I think these are answers that the public would like to hear. I'd also like to, you know, the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition did a report on predictive policing called Before the Bullet Hits the Body. And I'd just like to read a few statements from members of the community who were surveyed about predictive policing. One community member says, "The LAPD seems to have a mindset that goes beyond profiling or targeting. It's the mindset of trying to make us disappear." Regarding what it feels like to see people get stopped by police in folks-owned neighborhoods, quote, "I get really, really angry. That's how I feel." If that's what you're asking. I feel really angry and I feel hopeless. And it takes a lot to not get into it because I feel that it's wrong and I feel I need to step in. But then I resist because I feel that I'll just make the situation really worse. I just have a feeling that I can't really do anything. I hope you take these voices seriously, and I hope you take the racism of the police seriously. Thank you.
Amanda Riggle, followed by Nicholas Walrath and Courtney Eccles.
So, hello. Since pedigree seems to matter to you guys, I'm a low-income first-generation student working on my PhD. I've started off at a trailer park, and now I'm going to get my doctorate. And I'm also part of the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. I'm also co-chair of the State of California Socialist Party USA. Thank you. So my interactions with police have always been mixed, coming from a low-income community, but obviously being white. I remember the first time and only time a gun has ever been pulled on me was by a police officer when they misidentified my license plate as belonging to a Hispanic individual who had a peaceful warrant out for her arrest. The second the officer saw that I was white, he put his gun away. You tell us that these police aren't racist. You tell us that they don't target black and brown bodies in our community, but firsthand, we see it. We see it every day. None of these programs are going to prevent this. These programs just disguise the fact that this policing is going to continue. Nobody deserves to have a gun pointed at them.
Thank you. Nicholas. Thank you.
Hi, I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. I'm a researcher for the group. My overarching point is that data-driven programs such as predictive policing are driven by economic interests at the expense of poor communities of color. To quote one academic, predictive policing locates, quote, the violence of the future in the poor of the present. It is inherently classist as it never outputs its, quote, hotspots in sites where far more malicious white-collar crimes occur. Fire, finance, insurance, real estate. Actors whom some of you owe your political careers to. Its widespread adoption, around 150 police departments currently use it, has also enriched the fortunes of companies like Palantir and Predpol, whose work essentially weaponizes and degrades the discipline of anthropology, using it for counterinsurgency and counterterrorism purposes. As issues of class are inextricably bound up with racial prejudice, sexism, transphobia, anti-Muslim sentiment, and other bigotries reinforced by state institutions, policies, and technologies, predictive policing illustrates that these are interconnected struggles against which to resist its objective empirical facade. Predpol harms. It doesn't build communities, but renders them as spaces of exception, ripe for lethal encounters with an occupying militarized police force that still commands the majority of the city's budget. So we don't need more cops in classrooms. We don't need more officer-friendly bullshit. We need less of your encroachment into our lives, because I'm sick of this counterterrorism bullshit. Thank you.
Thank you. Next,
Courtney
speaker.
Eccles.
I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and I'm also a PhD student in Criminology, Law, and Society at UC Irvine. And I just want to address the bogus science that these programs, and in particular LASER, are based on. For the many reasons already discussed by my comrades, we actually have no way of knowing whether or by how much LASER has impacted crime in Los Angeles. And this fact is actually reflected in the evaluations of LASER written by Craig Uchida, who, by the way, is also the president of JSS, which is the company that is monetarily compensated by LAPD to implement and analyze the program. This, of course, is extremely unethical and a complete conflict of interest. Even still, it should be noted that the majority of these purported evaluations were based on anecdotal evidence or mere correlations without any statistical analyses. These reports undoubtedly could not withstand scientific scrutiny, as they are simply not science. Furthermore, in the two reports where statistical analysis was used, they did not account for the fact that crime was already on the decline in the years preceding the start dates analyzed by JSS. Even still, the results of these two studies, which JSS touts as demonstrating LASER's success, they actually demonstrate that LASER was found, in fact, to not have a statistically significant impact on any type of crime examined in some divisions, and then more times than not, LASER had no impact on most crimes, and in fact, the very areas where LASER was purportedly successful actually experienced a subsequent increase in violent crime the following year. Moreover, crime rates in LA are continually in flux as a result of faulty crime statistics, recording practices, and misclassification of crime by LAPD. Recall the 2015 investigation that revealed the misclassification of nearly 4,000 aggravated assaults. More broadly speaking, the only two known empirical studies assessing predictive policing, where the researcher was not monetarily invested in a particular outcome of the study, found that predictive policing programs increased enforcement, but actually had little impact on the reduction of crime. And as all of this evidence illustrates, including the reports from the very developers of LASER themselves, they illustrate these programs are not only fundamentally flawed, but need to be dismantled now.
The next three speakers, Kai Utsumi, Yasmina Aiden, and Edwin Everhart.
Okay, so I'm a little bit taller. Hi everyone, thank you for having us. I'm a trans woman of color, and I'm also Somalian American. I lived here 20 years. I'm a US citizen for 16 years now. If you look at me, you'll see trans woman of color, tall perhaps. I speak 4 languages, LAPD, none of you probably don't speak more than 2 languages, okay? I have a bachelor's and master's degree, I graduated with honors. I get targeted simply for being a trans black woman who have a Muslim background. Look at me, do I look like a terrorist to you, Mr. Officer over there? I'm not a terrorist, but I've been targeted and I became, I became target of your establishment simply for being who I am. I could not find any other reasons why I am being targeted by the LAPD, because I do not have any criminal background. I don't have anything record that indicates you have to target me, simply because I'm a trans woman of color who speaks out of her mind and stand up for what's justice. And this is bullshit. Predictive policing is nothing but Stasi, Nazi Germany style of controlling and targeting community of colors. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
If you heard what I'm saying before, it's because you're not listening, you don't take action on what we the people say. LAPD, data-driven, evidence-based policing presumes criminal activity is full of historic racism and classism against black, brown, and poor people, and highly racial profiling. The National Academy of Science, you might have heard this before, has expressed such deep skepticism about behavioral surveillance and data mining, which is an inherent part of LAPD's Operation Laser and PredPol predictive policing, which are pseudoscience. Edward Banfield, whatever his name is a historic white supremacist and racist, and he is also a racist Christian. There are progressive Christian and racist Christian, and he is a white supremacist racist Christian, is a predecessor, his policy is a predecessor to Bratton's LAPD broken window policy. Predictive policing is a continuation of policing program as gang injunction, mostly against black and brown people, racism, and targets and criminalizes the people of color.
Go ahead and wrap up.
This commission needs to have a full commission hearing of this. Why are two commission members absent? You know, you need to have a full commission. You should have this hearing before a full commission. This commission needs to demolish predictive policing. Shut it down.
Thank you.
I am an anthropologist in the UCLA Department of Anthropology, and I joined a group of colleagues to express our shared concern with PredPol and the research practices of a member of our department, Professor Jeffrey Brantingham. We are in firm agreement about the following 4 concerns. First, Professor Brantingham's training and methods, in a general sense, do have precedent in certain fields of anthropology, but across every field of anthropology, there has been significant pushback and often complete rejection of the use of anthropological knowledge and methods to concretely predict complex patterns of behavior in social contexts. This has been an especially strong rejection relating to evolutionary behavioral modeling, and again, about predicting behavior that is categorized as crime. Second, we are very concerned about the ethics of the relationship between Professor Brantingham and his research. UCLA as an institution and the private enterprise PredPol, of which he is a founder and which contracts with many police departments. Professor Brantingham and UCLA received grants from the US Air Force and the National Institute of Justice, which have been used to conduct research that has been used then to promote the private company he founded. That fact raises many questions about financial propriety and general conflict of interest in his research. Third, we believe it may be a violation of a core anthropological duty, as outlined in the Code of Ethics of the American Anthropological Association, to do no harm to those we study, by applying anthropological knowledge in such a way that may cause harm to people who these algorithms identify as being at increased risk of crime. Professor Brantingham has a duty to all the participants in his research, including people who are reduced to data points, to treat them ethically. And just to summarize 2 further points, these kind of predictive technologies deal out punishment and harm unequally to different communities based on race and income. You'll find a full text version of these comments by email. Thank you.
The next 2 speakers, Jamie Garcia, followed by Jared Perriott.
So I want to start off by saying that this is an extremely long overdue process, an extremely long one. The community has a right to know what's going on, and LAPD continually claims to be this police department that is that values transparency. Well, we know that surveillance programs have been going on in this community for well over 10 years. The laser program and PredPol are just one component of it. Suspicious activity reporting program launched in 2008. How long have you been using Trapwire? How long have you been using automatic license plate readers? So this hearing right now is no accolade to us or no reassurance to us that you are transparent and you are telling us what is really going on in the city. This is because we pushed you to be transparent. This is because we forced you to be transparent. This is because we actually had to file lawsuits to make you be transparent, where we had to spend $400 of our own fucking money to make you be transparent. And that's a lot when it comes to community members. I'm a volunteer with this organization. I don't get paid to be here. We're doing this research on our own. And you're coming forward and you're really glossing over things and making it sound like you're not really targeting community members. The SAR program, for example, where you stated, oh, we don't use race in the SAR program. But again, like we showed in this presentation, many things can be a proxy for race. SAR program is a proxy for race. We saw in the 2015 audit that actually in the gender count, 50% of SARs were open on the black women. That's racism. We saw in previous audits that like 80% of SARs were opened on people of color. That's racial profiling. That's targeting black and brown communities. Then you said of your 16 behaviors, you don't mention what behaviors you're criminalizing or seeing as suspicious. Cameras, binoculars, asking for hours of operation. You're not mentioning those things. And you know what? You do target homes for anchor points in laser. It says in your own PowerPoint, residences, business. A resident is someone's home. And you are evicting them from their home, essentially making them homeless as an intervention. That is not an intervention in our communities. We need homes, not handcuffs.
Jed Perriott, followed by Alexis Naoko.
Hi, Jed Perriott with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. I'm also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, who stand with many community organizations demanding an immediate audit of PredPol and Operation Laser, which are, as it is clearly has been exhibited today, it is clearly these programs, they are high-tech, cutting-edge 21st century slave patrols. It is a continuation of what has always been going on since the founding of this country. It is the hunting down of black and brown bodies in the name of white property owners accumulating more and more wealth across the city, as they continue to do across Los Angeles and across the world, via genocide, slavery, exploitation, mostly of black people, but also of other people of color across the world. And slavery continues behind prison walls. Open-air prisons exist in this city. Open-air prisons. And to you, your community outreach, public safety to you, what does that mean? It means having ice cream socials where officers have belts full of weapons, social workers with weapons on their belt, reaching out to unhoused people who are going through trauma on a day-to-day basis from sanitation sweeps. Is public safety sending, Michael Moore, is public safety sending an army of police officers to a Trader Joe's to fire bullets into a crowded supermarket where you killed the manager? You confirmed today? It wasn't the suspect, it was LAPD. Once again, who will get away with murdering another person? And one of the things that really work, a good friend of mine who was formerly incarcerated, grew up in South LA, was called a monster by LAPD, by judges, by lawyers, was told he was going to spend the rest of his life in prisons because he was a hard criminal that belonged in a cage. Because of social workers, because of re-entry programs that actually work, that do not involve any law enforcement, he's now a father who has a job, smiling, happily housed. He's amazing, he's a person. The problem is not criminality, the problem is policing, and the problem is these programs. That's what needs to be extracted, is the programs themselves.
Alexis Naoko, followed by Adolf Alzufar and Akil Gopal.
My name is Alexis, and I'm here to speak against LAPD's use of PredPol and laser.
Predictive policing technologies are the same racist policing practices that LAPD has always used, just under the guise of science. But of course, this isn't real science, it's just a twisting of science, because if you actually cared about science, you would care about all the studies that have said that machine learning algorithms amplify and reinforce biases. You would care that the National Academy of Science has sort of said these types of practices are neither effective nor ethical ways to address crime, and that these programs are, in fact, magnifying bias. So, for example, we know that white and black people use drugs at the same rate, but black people are arrested at significantly higher rates. And using a program like PredPol, it would direct the police to patrol and arrest communities that have black folks at higher and higher rates, just magnifying all of the racist trends that already exist in this country's approach to mass incarceration and police brutality. I think it's also important to situate this conversation in the broader national conversation around police brutality. When you preemptively criminalize specific people and specific communities, those police are then approaching those people, and they're not just diminishing their privacy and their dignity, but oftentimes they're using excessive force that leads to the death of people who are not violent, not criminals. So in order to address these problems, we need to end our predictive policing programs until we have a thorough audit by the Inspector General and a public conversation about whether these programs are something that are helping the public safety of these communities or are actually causing more harm. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to start out with the question, how many police officers actually know the laws that are being broken, like in detail? How many of them actually know these laws? So, community members, what brings down crime, homicide, and those things? So is it like an arrest? Is it arbitrary killings? Let's say something like financial crimes, or let's say something like the crimes of the wealthy. Are those things being brought down by this institution called police? We all know that the LAPD claims to do what common sense knows that policy, social pillars, such as economic policy, public education, advocacy does, right? The reason why crime goes down is probably because of economics. The reason why crime goes down is probably because of a rise in public education. So what does it mean instead to be an antisocial and brutal institution that justifies the use of its thuggery to those who in turn use it to quiet their paranoia about being amongst the masses and not turn to their emotional intelligence? It means to be an institution that's extremely well financed to do what? To do the thing that it's not mandated to do, because what's been mandated is the institutionalization of human rights, which should be manifested through this civilian oversight committee. Basically, it means what the LAPD does is it does not bring peace. It does not do the things that it claims to do. It does not bring down crime. It does not bring down homicide. It does none of those things. It does not propel society, which Latin Socios Partnership, instead the institutionalization of human rights does. This committee is supposed to come out of institutionalizing human rights, and this committee should stand up and realize that it has a higher place in this society than the LAPD does. Name one instance in human history where the police has gone the same way as social change. It has never happened because they are thugs. Thank you.
I want to reiterate what a lot of people have been saying, which is that people are profiting off of this racist pseudoscience. PredPol is a private company that's marketing its product to other cities after experimenting and testing it on LA communities.